I have to. So, how did you reconcile? Well, just walk me through the presser yesterday. Like everybody's got some hot takes. How'd you land the plane on reconciling yesterday?
I thought that it was a press conference he needed to have after what was pretty an underwhelming. And I understand it. We asked coaches to have all the answers immediately after the game, and
Mhm.
they still have to be able to walk through it themselves. But I thought at the very least, and this is probably stupid on my part, but at the very least, I think that he owed it to people to show more disappointment than maybe. And I know that it was there for him on Friday, but what happened is inexcusable. And I appreciate that he took ownership of that on Monday. And it's not that he didn't on Friday, but it's the way that he took ownership of it on Monday. And even if it met with a ton of skepticism, which I think is warranted, the idea that he's telling you to your face that it's not going to look like that again, I appreciate it.
Mm.
I appreciate the acknowledgement that it never should have looked like that. And I appreciate the acknowledgement that against Northwestern, it's not going to look like that. Now, they have to make that stand up on its own when the ball is kicked off at 11 a.m. and they got to bring their own juice because it's going to be sleepy. But it's at least appreciated by me and only me, because I can only speak for myself, that he acknowledged how things went on Friday the way that he did, and that it can't happen like that again. Because not every coach has that I've covered here at Nebraska. And so I do appreciate that he stepped in that direction. I thought that he tried to be as introspective without completely opening up the doors to himself and the program as he could be in that kind of situation on Monday. I thought that he was willing to take the conversation in places that maybe other coaching staff or head coaches wouldn't. So I appreciate that Matt Rhule has depth and has layers to him and isn't closed off in a situation where it'd have been easy to, because you guys have all experienced this. When things aren't going well, what do we tend to do as humans? You tend to shut down. Things didn't go well on Friday, and Matt Rhule didn't shut down on Monday when he had to face questions from the media. And it's not like he was standing in front of live fire there and worried about a ton, but it's at least appreciated by me as a media member, appreciated by me as someone who watched a ton of football, that he was willing to stand up there and as much as he could open things up as to his thoughts as to where they are in their process. He was vulnerable in a way that I think I appreciate. He was open in a way that I certainly appreciate. So, maybe people didn't get every answer that they wanted.
Mm.
At least he was giving you something. And I don't think it was manufactured. I don't think it was rehearsed. I don't think it was fake. I think that was as raw and real as we've seen Matt Rhule be in a vulnerable state after a loss that shook him and clearly shook the fan base. I mean, the reaction after this one is closer to stuff we would see out of the Pelini era than it has been anything Riley and Scott Frost.
Mm. Shafe, would you? I'm curious what you think the difference was, or maybe the reason for the difference between Friday and Monday was in terms of the tone you were talking about with Matt Rhule. If I gave you two options, let me know which of these, like where you would put the percentages on this. First, like you said, hadn't watched the film yet, didn't necessarily have enough time to digest it real time, what he actually felt about it. Second, the things he wanted to say, he hadn't told the team or his other coaches yet, so he wasn't going to tell us.
I mean, I think those are two very they line up with each other. I couldn't parallel thoughts is kind of what I was getting at.
Okay. Okay.
I think they work in conjunction. So what I'm trying to say is it's not going to be like a wide split between the two. So maybe 60-40, 60 with the first, 40 with the second, just kind of spitballing that
Mm-hmm.
is sort of the first thought that I have. But I think that kind of fits. I do think, like I said, there's the emotional side of it where, the fan base, the media, everybody wants answers immediately after the game. But you're right. He does need to assess what happened. And he needs to have the conversations with the staff and with the players and that too. So I think there's an absolute lane for both of those things to be true in conjunction with each other.
So, Shafe, you think much, and maybe this isn't kind of how he thinks, but clearly when you're that authentic or transparent, you're going to leave yourself open to criticism, right? Where I mean, it just goes with it. How much of that do you think is useful in what it takes to succeed at this job?
I think you have to be at least aware and acknowledge that you're going to be criticized for things that are fair. You're going to be criticized for things that you can't control. You're going to be criticized for things that are just patently unfair. And that's just the nature of the job. You know, that's unfortunately you have to have some kind of shell. You know, you've got to be a little bit of a turtle, I guess. You have to be able to recede into the shell, and you know, the attacks have to be able to bounce off of you. But at the same time, you have to be able to poke your head up and you know, have the wherewithal and the ability to communicate what it is that you thought happened, what it is that you thought resulted in your team going up to Minnesota and playing this game and looking thoroughly outclassed. Even though you had 6 great games before it, great's a, you know,
Yeah.
just let that hang in the air, whatever. Great isn't what I really mean, but you had 6 games that weren't representative of that before it. So the sample size is a lot larger of what your team has actually looked like. But the emotional toll that seeing Nebraska play like that in that building against that team with that kind of, you know, inability to fight back, you know, can outweigh the good that you've done. You have to be able to understand that as a coach, because it comes with the territory of the job. I do think Matt Rhule is someone that can. I think we've covered a coach or two in the past that wasn't able to separate that, you know, or acknowledge like, hey, not every criticism of me is going to be completely fair, but there's stuff in there that is, or criticism of our team. And I think Rhule knows that. And I think I appreciate that he sort of acknowledges that in the way that questions are asked or in the way that he answers things.
Schaefer, I would say, yeah, I was going to ask something different, but were you surprised that he said, hey, yeah, everything you guys are going to ask me a question about is right? I don't know that I've heard that.
It's a disarming technique. I mean, it's a way to basically let everybody know, like, hey, we effed up. You know,
Yeah. At what point? What are you going to say, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's kind of like he could have basically just said you watched it, you know, like, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to defend in a performance that they had on Friday.
Mike J, in 28 seconds in the press box hallway, an hour before the game, you said exactly what played out. So I asked the question, what's he gonna say?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Did you leave anything out in that explanation to me of what
before the
happened
game?
of what happens in Minneapolis in that stadium?
No, I mean, and look, I was just going off of just the gut feel of how Nebraska has performed in these situations. And this is a Super Bowl game for Minnesota. Like, I don't know how, and you're a former player and you would have a better insight to this than certainly I would. And I can't speak for Ravi, but I'm assuming it'd be a little bit similar there too. We've all been competitors, but you've at least played at the level that Nebraska football is at. And I find it just absolutely hard to explain how that team couldn't have been more motivated or more ready to go, or whatever the phrasing is, that just allowed Minnesota to come in and just own every aspect of that game. And it always feels like when Nebraska leaves that building in particular, that they just want it more. It just, and the way that like PJ Fleck kind of like sticks the knife in and then he turns it a little bit and then he smiles to the camera and turns it a little more. And then he has another cute phrase and turns it a little more. That guy loves beating Nebraska. He absolutely loves it. His team loves it. They love this game. They hate every conversation about Nebraska because meanwhile, while they're working and they're doing their thing and they're stacking wins and they've had success and they go win in bowl games, Nebraska's over here getting talked about. Is Dylan Raiola a Heisman candidate? Is Matt Rhule a Penn State coaching candidate? Is Nebraska back? Is Nebraska this? Is Nebraska that? Since PJ Fleck has been there, all Minnesota has done since year 0 for him is stack a bunch of wins, have some success, do it in the relative obscurity of a media market that doesn't care about him, do it in the relatively obscurity of a national media market that doesn't care about him. And they have to hear about this program a few states away that they've beaten now 6 straight times. Yeah, they're sick of Nebraska. I try to explain this. Their fan base hates Nebraska because Nebraska represents everything they can't be in the sense no one ever talks about them. Even when they win that game, the conversation's more about how did Nebraska let this happen than what Minnesota did on the field. Like it's so they are so it's almost like a little brother complex, and they are more than happy to just needle and needle and needle. And at some point, you got to see Nebraska fight back. And I know Matt Rhule doesn't own all of this, but he owns the last two, and he's going to own the next however many. And it has to matter at some point to everybody in that program that the day that you play Minnesota needs to stand out on the schedule. It was an issue when this happened with Iowa, and I think it's an issue now.
So, I number one, I agree 100% with that. Because, all week I was talking about on the show, the level of disdain.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody we talked to, I'm like, hey, it's volatile. There's vitriol. They hate us. The Nebraska chance, 45 minutes before the game started was further example of that. That student section was there early. But could I convince you, Schaefer, that with where this team was, right, level of success, you'd won at Maryland, you'd come from behind against Michigan, you were showing some resolve. Could I make the case that this particular team had to go through something like this to learn from in order to not feel this way again?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. So there's a duality to this, and it's why I picked Minnesota last week. It's why I picked Minnesota in the summer. It's why, when the schedule came out, everyone was sort of like, this isn't a great spot. Because in order for, and we did this after the Michigan game too, but in order for Nebraska to be the 8-4 in the projections that everybody has, there has to be 4 losses. Like a season, we think about college football too much like it's always about perfection. Like there's going to be losses in there, and these teams have to go through that. And this is one of those losses. And what matters, just like it did after the Michigan game, is how Nebraska picks itself up, and does this loss beat them again? Or do they show up and do they play better football on Saturday against a Northwestern team that's limited, but does a bunch of things that are going to give Nebraska some issues, and is going to be another opportunity to prove, hey, we can be tough. Hey, we can play this Big Ten football style. We can play when the game script isn't exactly how we want it. Like that's their opportunity in front of them. I think the larger problem that the fan base feels is that Nebraska showed that on Friday in a nationally televised game against a team that beat them 5 straight times. It means they can show it against anybody. It means that they can just not show up at any point in time. Now, can they eventually make you not feel that? Yeah. It's called stacking wins, and that's what they've got to do. And so if you go beat Northwestern, if you go handle business against UCLA, then you got Penn State and Iowa. And I'm leaving the USC game out because that one's a little bit different. But you have opportunities to change the narrative about how people talk about you instead of playing into it like they did exactly on Friday. So, yeah, I can believe that this team needs to go through that. They need to have that disappointment. It needs to burn inside of them every time they're out on the field. But I could also argue they did it against UCLA the year before. They did it against Michigan State in 2023. This isn't new. That's why it was an easy prediction to make in the summer. That's why it's hard to predict for Nebraska to win a bunch of games in a row, because they haven't shown you at any point that they've learned their lesson. They're still going to put their hand on the hot stove. So, it cuts both ways. I can believe absolutely that they need to learn things, but I can also point out that I feel like they should have already.
So where do you draw the line if I told you, like, that's not their burden to bear?
This particular team?
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with all of that. I mean, there's enough guys that played in that UCLA game.
Yeah, I don't ask to tell you, like, to say that I'm like that's how I feel. I'm just saying,
right?
If that was the sentiment that they're trying to move forward.
Yeah, I can respect that you want every season to stand on its own. That's great. That's not how anyone's collective consciousness of sports works. Unfortunately, when you play for a piece of laundry, everyone associates that piece of laundry with everything that happened before it and everything that happens in front of it. So when Mike Schaefer is watching the Cleveland Guardians with a lead in a postseason baseball game and it's the 9th inning, I don't know if the reliever has ever heard of Jose Mesa before, but what do you think I'm thinking of in that scenario? That's the reality of sports. So like when you're if the Dodgers and the Blue Jays go to Game 7, you're going to have some instinctive thoughts about Game 7 against Houston. It's just the way that this works. Now,
you know what's funny
do
about
the players own this? No, but the players don't own the conversation that happens around the team. The players own the product that's on the field. That's all they own. They don't get to own the narrative. The narrative's created with or without them. Like, that's something that we have to understand. And Matt Rhule needs to understand. He doesn't, like, Matt Rhule loves to own everything in the program. He doesn't get to own the conversation that happens around it. He doesn't get to erase your memories that other things happen. That doesn't mean that we can't, acknowledge that just because things happened before doesn't mean it has to happen again. But it's impossible to try to tell a fan base that's been beaten down in this situation over and over and over that their memories of it aren't an emotional, real thing while they're watching it play out again.
What was the irony of watching Vlad Guerrero Jr. wear an Austin Matthews hockey jersey to the stadium? Like, if you're talking about not your burden, the Leafs can't win Game 7s.
Like, yeah, but the Blue Jays have Joe Carter forever. And
he rocks the Austin Matthews jersey, and I was like, just all I could think of was the line in Major, just huge marbles. Like, that guy could give 2 cares. And I get it. You could pit that against Joe Carter, but he intentionally picked Austin Matthews, right? As if to say, bring it on. Like, I don't know, man. I got to chuckle. I know the Leafs or the, Toronto fans got it, but I don't know if national media picked up on it. You know what I mean?
I appreciate when teams that have, multiple cities that have multiple sports teams, and it feels like it's a bigger deal when it's in a kind of a mid-market than it is in a major market. Like, I appreciate when you can see the love that they have for one another across it. Like, that's one of those things that's cool about the Minneapolis market and the Cleveland market. I don't know that you get that so much in LA and Chicago and New York because there's so many teams, but I do appreciate that. As someone who I didn't care who won last night. I wanted an entertaining game, and I certainly got it.
Schaefer, so let me ask you the question. This is, I think, the natural follow-up to what we've talked about so far this morning. What's your level of confidence that they come out from Northwestern and have learned their lesson?
It's pretty high. I mean, I think Nebraska is a good football team. I don't think that they're great. I don't think that they are perfect, but I think they're a good football team. And I think that they do things well, and I think that they can stress other teams. And I think they have guys on their team that are matchup issues for Northwestern. And I think Northwestern's offense is limited enough that Nebraska can get this into a certain game flow, and they can make things difficult for Preston Stone and Griffin Wild and whoever else. And so I believe that Nebraska has the ability to go win this game, and I think they will on Saturday. I don't think that this is a loss that's going to beat them multiple times. It's the loss that just sits in the back of your mind anytime you want to feel exuberant about where Nebraska football is, because it brings you back home. It's a grounding kind of thing. And that doesn't have to be bad. That can be something like Damon was saying earlier that they can build upon as a team, but it's how you use it. It's how it is motivational fuel for what you're doing. It makes me wonder if it can be the sort of thing that, hey, I don't want to go that hard today at practice, but in the back of your mind, you're like, well, I didn't go that hard before we played Minnesota, and then we got our ass kicked. Is it that kind of thing? And it can work the other way too. And we've seen it work the other way where game gets tight, Nebraska gets tight, and then they fall apart. I don't think that's this team. I really don't. And I think they had a bad night. And I think it was exacerbated by the circumstances of the team that they were playing and the situation that they were in and everything surrounding it. I don't think they were distracted by the Matt Rhule Penn State talk. I think they had a legitimately bad night and a bad game plan, and they have to move forward from it. And it requires the coaches to help them out too. Dana Holgorsen can't have another game this year where Corey Barney gets 1 target. Full stop. Can't happen ever again.
Real time in the game. I'm like, we could talk about a lot, but I mean, they're just easy.
Get your best players the ball.
There's just too much low hanging fruit where everybody had to be accountable than one general narrative, right? Like,
agreed.
They were bad. They were bad across the board.
It was a bad game plan. It was a bad, bad performances in there. You had miscommunications throughout on your offensive line. You had the worst version of Dylan Raiola where he gets hit and he can't keep his eyes downfield and he just holds the ball longer and longer each subsequent time. I do wonder if Dana Holgorsen has answers for how to help Dylan Raiola, because we're now 7 games in and we aren't seeing any extra rolling him out of the pocket. We're not seeing things that can help mitigate this. And so I do wonder, and Dana's going to talk today. And I would imagine
it's going to be
get some
fascinating.
questions. And, he's not someone, he doesn't beat around the bush. And that's why we like when he gets up and talks. And so I will be curious if he's defensive. I'll be curious if he's introspective. I'll be curious if he's very open about it. Or I'll be curious if he's like, you know what? You can see it on Saturday. That's my response. Any of these things are possible. And so he's a key figure in all of this. And he's not the reason they lost the game, but that game plan didn't help them win the game. And that matters just as much as anything else.
You know what's interesting? I said this to KC at some point during the broadcast. It's almost like when he made the crazy play to Lindemeyer and then threw it left-handed. I said, I hope it's not like the guy that makes his first 3-point shot and he's not really a 3-point shooter. I just was hoping that some of those early third down conversions had come by easier, so you didn't fall into fool's gold.
Yeah, I mean that's incredibly.
I had this
point.
exact conversation in real time with the guy I was sitting with. That exact as he does.
I said it during I was like, ugh.
As he does the left-handed throw, there was a play where it was literally 11 seconds before he threw the football, the one to Lindemeyer on the backside.
Mm-hmm.
I was timing it. It was 11 seconds. That's 3 or 4 plays. Worth of time. And we said it real time ago, hey, I hope this isn't negative reinforcement where it feels like he can do this all game.
That's a good term. Mike J.
It's a concern.
Hey, let me ask you something about the Vikings real quick.
Oh no.
Well, no, this is jeez, it's legit. How do you want them to play when you know they're playing well? Like, what does it look like for you with Wentz?
Well, it doesn't have Wentz, so we start there. I mean, I guess if they have to have Carson Wentz, I kind of need them.
The game that Joe Flacco. Like, consider the source.
Well, I'm just saying, if you have Carson Wentz and you know that he's pretty erratic in terms of throwing the ball down the field, I probably wouldn't have him throw the ball 40 plus times in the game, even though I understand the Eagles have a bad pass defense. And that's what makes that loss frustrating. I actually thought Minnesota outplayed them in a long stretch of that game, but you have a pick 6 from Carson Wentz and you have 5 field goals in the red zone, or 5 field goals overall, 4 in the red zone. They weren't able to score touchdowns because he can't be precise with his passes. So there's a couple things you can do with that. You shorten the passes, or you start giving the ball to Jordan Mason, and instead of 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1, and then you give a horrible holding penalty that takes a touchdown off the board, you've already picked up that first down because you got Jordan Mason, who's criminally underutilized.
He's pretty physical, man.
I love that guy. That guy is everything I want in a running back. He is a great pass protector. He is an absolute bull when he's running the ball, and he's a better catcher than you think out of the backfield. He is a 3-down running back, and when Aaron Jones comes back, they can just put him in backup duty because it's Jordan Mason's role. And I just think they don't utilize him enough. I think Kevin O'Connell loves to design pass plays, and he falls into this thing where he's got the perfect play for the perfect situation. Here's the problem. You don't have Kirk Cousins. You don't have Sam Darnold. You're operating with, Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall and Carson Wentz, and the worst version of all of it, J.J. McCarthy, because he's the least equipped to play the position right now.
Oh,
so you can't run your actual offense. So you have to be able to, goes back to the Dana Holgorsen thing. You can fall in love with your play design and what you do really well, or you can go win the damn football game. One of them feels better than the other.
How crazy was it that Coach Rhule talked about who you want to be versus who you need to be? Like, what can you do? Like that of all the things that I like, that was probably the shot heard around the world. Because
do you know the biggest irony in him saying that, though, is we spent all last season complaining about Marcus Satterfield's offense, pointing out how bad offenses are under Matt Rhule, And all Matt Rhule would probably tell you off to the side, he probably wouldn't be able to say it publicly because he'd get crucified for it, is that he won a bunch of games marrying his mediocre offense with a defense and playing in a very specific style. And there are times where this version of Nebraska would probably be a little bit more successful if they could marry those two things together. And yet there are other times where this version of Nebraska can go put up 40 points because they have that kind of ability on offense. And so the truth has to be somewhere in the middle, and it's on Matt Rhule and Dana Holgorsen to figure that out. And this is we're also, since I am talking too much, but I had this thought just pop into my head. We're also seeing how difficult it is for an offensive coordinator working with a head coach when they don't have the exact same view on what they want to happen. Because Dana Holgorsen has been a head coach. Dana Holgorsen has been a play caller for a long time. Matt Rhule doesn't call offensive plays, but he has a pretty good idea of what he wants the game flow to look like and what he thinks Nebraska should do. But Matt Rhule, famously, who likes to be in control, has ceded all of that to Dana Holgorsen. So it is a very, we probably, because of how last season finished, did not allow for the idea that these two would not be in lockstep agreement with how game might play out and what might be needed in certain situations.
Yeah, it's fascinating because all offseason I talked about the offensive line, and it was in regards to run blocking because I said, and who knows, I could end up being way wrong, and so far it's looking that way maybe. I said, I think Coach Holgorsen wants to run the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pre-Mark Way. This was, the 3 tight ends, and I'm like, these guys have a chance to be pretty good because I felt like they would run the ball. I think they've proven they can run the ball. I'll be curious to see if they go back to running the football because their best players, for the most part, outside of EJ, are pass guys. Like the whole who we need to be versus who, like I'm fascinated by it, in my opinion.
But there's no reason that you can't, they were able to utilize both against Maryland. They're able to utilize both against Michigan State. It's the Minnesota game where you come out with 3 straight passes, where you have a long stretch where Emmett Johnson doesn't touch the ball, where Isaiah Mosey runs for 5 yards and you immediately go back for a pass and get sacked and the drive's ruined. Like, some of it is learning to build upon yourself. Some of it is it doesn't have to be an either or. Like, I feel like I hear that a lot in the discussion about Nebraska football. They need to run the ball. They need to get the playmakers the ball. Well, you can do both. Good teams have figured out how to do both. Like, there's no reason that Nebraska can't have an offense that highlights Emmett Johnson and can also get Ja'Cory Barney 5 touches a game, can also get Dane Key an opportunity in the end zone, can also get an Isaiah Hunter a pass or two. There's no reason this can't exist. And part of it is Nebraska doesn't run enough offensive plays. How many games have they played this year where they've been in the low 60s or the 50s because they're not converting or their defense is allowing 9-minute drives?
I think one of their losses was the most plays they ran. I think was Michigan this.
Well, that's because they were giving up 1-play drives on 70-yard.
So they ran like 76 plays though, and I think in the Big Ten that's by far the most that they've ran.
Yeah, and so that they have to kind of figure out what team you're going to be in conference play. There might be an argument to be made the Akron and Houston Christian games, not because of the score or any of that. It maybe diluted what you thought you were going to do in conference play, and now they have to change that they're actually in.